And we're back again, this time to tackle
Prophecies.
I think this will be particularly interesting, but strap yourselves in, kiddos, because this is definitely going to be a long one.
Get down to the nitty gritty.
This will slay you, like it will blow your mind. It's so cool. So I would encourage you to get out a Bible if you have one, because I'm not actually going to read it, but I want you to read it yourself because it's amazing. But I'm not going to, because I know it would take a long time. So I'm just going to summarize.
Okay, so I'm going to be honest about my approach in how I research these topics. I'm going to grant that Daniel says the things that she says Daniel says, just because I think the implications don't matter. I don't see any point in doing all of this uber research into the history of Daniel if I think ultimately she's wrong regardless of...
Where I'm going to be is in Daniel, and the chapters are going to be 2, 7, and 8. The main one I'm going to talk about is chapter 2, but I encourage you to read chapters 2, 7, and 8 of Daniel, okay? A little bit of background here. Daniel was a prophet in the Old Testament, and prophets were basically these people that God chose, like specifically chose them to be mediators between him and his people.
Why would God need or want mediators? Especially human, infallible mediators. You think a perfect God would just do the job himself because God can do the job better than any of his mediators could. So why would he choose a less effective means of communicating when him communicating would be the most effective means of communicating by default because
he's God? What kind of weak-ass tiny God do you believe in that he
need or want mediators?
And so he would talk through these people and communicate different things he wanted them to know, like if they needed to correct a behavior they were doing wrong, like he told them that. Or a lot of times he spoke hope to them because the Jews were under a lot of different really oppressive kingdoms and just empires, and so God wanted to speak hope to them. Like,
instead of actually helping people, he just spoke hope to them. If I'm in an oppressive situation and you
Back is against the wall. This is not a test. It's the real deal.
you have literally all of the means possible to
Help me. Help me.
and you choose to not help me and only speak hope to me, how are you the perfect moral arbiter in that situation? It sounds like you are almost as bad as whatever is morally oppressing me.
hey, this kingdom won't last forever, like trust in me, like I will rule forever.
I mean, I could rule forever now and end all suffering forever, but I'm not going to do that because...
And so he spoke a lot of different things to them, but a lot of it was hope and like correction on different things. Okay, so Daniel, which is where I'm at right now, Daniel was one of these prophets, and he basically was around at the time of the Babylonian Empire, which started in 605 BC, and these events, which happened in chapter 2, happened in about 603 BC. And then you should know that Nebuchadnezzar was the king at this time. So basically, Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and he wanted someone to interpret it. Not only interpret it, but also to tell him what the dream was. So he wanted someone to do the impossible.
Why is interpreting a dream possible? Now, I'm not saying that it is in fact possible. I'm just curious why you think it's impossible.
And no one could do it. And I'm pretty sure he killed the other people who couldn't do it because he was Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel, the prophet of God, was the only one who could tell him purposely what the dream was about and interpret it for him.
So I really want to understand your perspective on this. So Nebuchadnezzar wants people to interpret his dream and tell him what the dream is. And he kills people who don't do this. But how do you know whether or not they did this correctly or not? Because as you stated,
It was Nebuchadnezzar.
how do you know he wasn't just killing them because he didn't like their interpretation as opposed to their interpretation was incorrect? And this is part of the problem that we pose. We kind of just have to assume that the first person that he doesn't kill is correct rather than the first person that he doesn't kill says the thing that he wants to hear. Basically, I'm challenging your belief in Nebuchadnezzar's motivations and why you would think that he would be doing this for anything other than hearing the answer he wanted to hear as opposed to hearing the accurate answer, because that undermines the credibility of the rest of your points. If someone just so happened to tell him the thing that he wanted to hear, that doesn't seem that miraculous or God-inspired. But if someone happened to be accurate, that also doesn't seem that miraculous or God-inspired. But at least accuracy has more credibility than telling someone what they want to hear.
So let me tell you the dream. Let me break it down here for you. I've got some notes, so if I look down, that's what I'm doing. So in his dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a statue, and this statue had a head of gold, a chest of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of both iron mixed with clay. Then Daniel interpreted it like this. He said, okay, king, this is what this dream means. There are going to be 3 kingdoms that will come after you. After the Babylonian kingdom, there will be 3 kingdoms that will come after you. He said the one right after yours will be inferior to yours. He was saying this to the king. And then the one after that will be of bronze, and it will rule over the whole earth. And the one to follow that, the 4th, will break and smash everything, yet it will be a divided kingdom. And then the last thing Daniel said to him was that during one of these kingdoms, God would set up a kingdom that would never end and would never be destroyed. And this is foreshadowing something that I'll talk about in a little bit. So now I'm going to interpret Daniel's interpretation, okay?
How do I know your interpretation of Daniel's interpretation is accurate? Again, this requires
A lot!
You want me to assume that Daniel's interpretation is correct somehow, and then you want me to assume that your interpretation of Daniel's interpretation of a dream is correct, without giving me a way to tell whether or not it's correct. You haven't outlined any standards. You've just said, I'm going to say a bunch of things, and you haven't given me any way to tell whether or not you're right. And that's the important crutch here.
So each of these body parts in the statue had, represented symbolically 4 different kingdoms that happened in history. So, starting with the head of gold, this represented symbolically Babylon and the Babylonian kingdom, which was happening during the time that Daniel prophesied about all this. Nebuchadnezzar started ruling in 605 BC, and the dream was interpreted again in 603-ish BC. The second part of the statue was the chest of silver, and this represented symbolically the kingdom that would come up after Babylon, which was the Medo-Persian kingdom. They conquered Babylon in 539 BC, and Daniel said in the dream that they would be inferior to Babylon. And
by what metric do you measure a kingdom to be inferior or superior to another's? Considering that they conquered Babylon, it seems that at least in one regard they were superior and not inferior, because they conquered the thing they're allegedly inferior to.
So not only is silver inferior to gold, think of metals, but the kingdom of the Medo-Persian kingdom, they were inferior to the Babylonian kingdom.
Not really.
So him saying that's historically accurate. You can Google everything I'm about to say, and you will see that they were inferior to the Babylonians.
How do you historically verify which kingdom was inferior or superior? Even if I did, how do I trust Google's veracity? Do I just believe it because Google says so? That certainly doesn't seem reasonable.
You can Google everything I'm about to say, and you will see that.
Just Google what I say, and some stuff will agree with me and some stuff won't, and I'm not going to tell you how to know which one's right and which one isn't.
The next part of the statue was the thighs of bronze, and this represented the Greek kingdom. If you remember in history, Alexander the Great was the guy who conquered almost all of the world, and in the dream, Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar that this kingdom would rule over the whole world. And just Google Alexander the Great's land, everything he conquered, and you'll see he ruled over a stinking huge part of the world. So that was right too. That was perfectly accurate. The Greeks conquered the Medes and the Persians in 331 BC by Alexander the Great, like I said. And they were actually known to use bronze in their armor. Again, I'm going to link this one in the description so you can read a little article about it, all about how they use bronze. And just like how in the statue, it was made of bronze.
I guess if they used bronze in their armor, that clearly must mean that was the bronze in the statue. I mean, it's not like any other empires in history have used bronze or anything. This is what I mean. Your citation is dramatically undercut when you realize that what's being pointed out is not at all unique or special to the kingdom that you're mentioning. Yeah, they used bronze, but they weren't the only ones to use bronze. And even if they did, that doesn't automatically make the interpretation accurate.
Of bronze. That wasn't an accident.
You have no good reason, or at least you've presented no good reason to suspect that it wasn't an accident, other than...
Nothing. That's right.
I don't know if you're getting my pattern here, but it's all for a reason. Now,
nothing that you said thus far has demonstrated that any of this is for a reason. All you've said is, these are some things that have happened. And nothing about, these are some things that have happened, demonstrates that these are some things that have happened for a reason. Even if everything you said was 100% accurate and just straight, nothing about it implies that it was for a reason. And if it is, enlighten me. For what reason? Because obviously Rome is the only divided kingdom in history, and no other kingdom under any other circumstances has been divided. Do you see how arbitrary this sounds? It sounds like you've come up with a general criteria, or Daniel came up with a general criteria, picked a kingdom, and you've just gone, that sounds good to me, without considering that this could apply to so many other kingdoms.
Keep in mind that Daniel prophesied about the Greek kingdom almost 300 years before these things happened. 300 years, almost 300, 275 I'm pretty sure. The last part was the legs of iron and then the feet of both iron and clay. And this represented the Roman kingdom. The Greeks were conquered by the Romans in 168 BC. And in this kingdom, it grew so big that they had to divide it into two parts. So the eastern and western parts of Rome. And in the dream, if you remember, Daniel said that even though this kingdom would crush everything and smash everything under its feet, that it would be a divided kingdom. And the fact that Rome was split into two parts, the western and eastern parts, like that all came true as well. And then out of all the kingdoms, the Roman kingdom was the strongest out of the four of them. And that's important because they were made of iron, which is the strongest of metals out of all four. Compared to gold, bronze, and silver, iron is the strongest metal.
This is actually a good example of what I'm talking about. Some kingdom was bound to be stronger than the other kingdoms. Unless every kingdom was always going to be perfectly equal, one kingdom was always going to be stronger than the others, and Daniel could have just picked that kingdom and said that was the one that represented iron. That's what I mean when it seems arbitrary. It doesn't seem to actually have anything to do with the kingdom specifically, except that it just so happened to be the strongest kingdom.
Daniel slays me out of the park with all of this because it was so perfect.
Sounds like he slays you out of the park because you haven't actually thought about what you said. You've just assumed it all to be true and gone,
There's impressive.
this is like someone who gets impressed by a magic trick. There's nothing wrong with being impressed by it, but once you start making up assumptions about how the magic trick is done, it's unjustified. Don't get me wrong. Chris Angel slays me, and I have no idea how he does what he does. But I don't jump to, obviously he has divinely inspired magical powers, because I don't know how he did things. And that's what this is. Once we take out substance, or the content, which really doesn't matter, all this is a guy did a thing, and I don't know how he did the thing, therefore...
Hundreds of years before any of these kingdoms happened, Daniel sat there and was like, yo, this is gonna happen. This kingdom's gonna rise up. This kingdom is gonna be this. All of these events happened or were prophesied about hundreds of years before they happened. And that to me is like one of the main reasons why I believe that the Bible is true, because
a guy did a thing and I don't know how he did the thing, therefore
it's true.
How do you know these prophecies were not retconned after the fact? Again, that would require me to get into the history of Daniel and its veracity, and I'm too lazy for that, but I'm just posing a question. How do you know someone didn't just go back and retcon these prophecies to make them make sense? How do you know they didn't wait until after the empire of Alexander the Great to then say this dude said to another dude in an interpretation of a dream that this is what that meant? If I'm functionally wrong, please correct me, but that seems to be the structure here. Such and such guy did such and such thing, and I don't know how he did such and such thing, therefore God.
It was all so historically accurate. And yeah, that's one of the main logical reasons why I believe in God, because a lot of the main reasons I believe in him are because like I'm a feeler kind of type of person, but this is a logical, very logical reason why I believe in God.
It seems much more logical to me that this was a retcon after the fact as opposed to an accurate prediction, because I don't see the connection. Also, what I find exceptionally interesting about these prophecies is that their connections are different. So the bronze represents the bronze of a specific kingdom, but the silver represents inferiority, and the gold represents superiority. Why are the standards for each piece of armor different? Wouldn't each piece of armor have the exact same standard? Wouldn't the gold represent a kingdom that prominently used gold, the silver represent a kingdom that prominently used silver, and the bronze represent a kingdom that prominently used bronze? But instead, they all have different standards for their interpretations or their prophecies, And that makes it seem far more
Random to me.
That's why I don't feel the need to go in extra hard and investigate every single historical context that you've presented, because even if I grant everything you've said, it boils down to someone did a thing that I don't understand how they did that thing, therefore God. This is the problem with opening the door to supernatural explanations. Then you have to contend with all of them, and you have to not only prove your supernatural explanation, but you have to prove why every other supernatural explanation is not correct. You have no idea. He could have been given these answers by the devil. He could have been given these answers by wizards, which are also in the Bible. He could have been given these answers by angels and not by God himself, or by any number of mystical, magical, mythical things. So, because I believe I've already made my case, I'm not going to repeat myself. So, yeah.
That being said, I appreciate you.